On the night of December 5th, 1928, thousands of banana workers and their families crowded into the town square of Ciénaga on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. They had been on strike for weeks. They were asking for written contracts, fair pay, and a single day of rest each week. They were asking it of the most powerful company most of them had ever known, an American corporation that owned the land, the railroads, the stores, and, in many ways, the government too. The soldiers arrived after midnight and set up machine guns around the square. An officer read a decree giving the crowd a few minutes to leave. Then they opened fire. We still do not know exactly how many people died that night. The company said almost no one. Others counted hundreds, even thousands. According to survivors, the bodies were loaded onto trains and dumped into the sea. And all of it, the strike, the soldiers, the silence that followed was about a fruit you can buy today for less than a single apple. The banana. How did something so ordinary, so cheap, so harmless, become powerful enough to topple governments and get people killed? To understand that, we have to go back thousands of years, long before the first banana ever reached the Americas. The banana did not come from the Caribbean, and it did not come from Africa. It came from the other side of the world. In the jungles of Southeast Asia and on the island of New Guinea, people were already growing bananas more than 7,000 years ago. They were among the very first farmers on Earth. But the banana they grew looked nothing like the one in your kitchen. Wild bananas are short, hard, and packed with large black seeds. Bite into one and you get a mouthful of bitter pulp and stony seeds. Barely worth eating. Over countless generations, those early farmers noticed rare plants that produced soft, sweet fruit with almost no seeds. They saved them, replanted them, and slowly bred the seeds away. The banana we eat today is a hybrid of two wild species, shaped by thousands of years of human patience. But there was a catch, and it would echo across the entire history of the fruit. A banana with no seeds cannot reproduce on its own. Every new plant has to be grown from a cutting of the last one, which means the banana you eat is not really the child of another banana. It is a clone, a genetic copy, kept alive only because humans keep planting it. Those ancient farmers had created something extraordinary and fragile at the same time, a fruit that depended on people completely. From New Guinea, the banana traveled. Seafarers carried it across the Pacific Islands and, more than 1,000 years ago, all the way to Africa. It crossed the continent, and its name traveled with it, passing through African and Arab tongues before it ever reached Europe. For most of human history, the banana stayed a regional food. In Asia, Africa, and the Pacific, starchy cooking bananas and plantains fed millions of people every day. They still do. In parts of East Africa, some communities came to depend on the banana so completely that it became the very center of daily life, eaten at nearly every meal. The sweet yellow dessert banana most of us picture is only one small branch of a huge and ancient family. Then European ships entered the story. Portuguese sailors found bananas growing in West Africa and carried them to the Canary Islands. And in 1516, a Spanish friar named Tomás de Berlanga carried banana roots across the Atlantic to the island of Hispaniola. The fruit thrived in the warm, wet soil of the Caribbean and Central America. But for centuries, it stayed a local food there too. Bananas bruise easily and rot fast. You could grow them by the thousand, but you could not get them across an ocean before they turned to mush. So how did a fragile tropical fruit become one of the most traded foods on Earth? The answer was waiting in the late 1800s, and it would arrive with steamships, railroads, and enormous ambition. In the United States after the Civil War, the banana was a strange and exotic luxury. At the Great Philadelphia Exhibition of 1876, bananas were sold wrapped in foil for 10 cents each. People ate them carefully with a knife and fork, the way you might eat something you were not quite sure about. Then a few men realized there was a fortune in this fruit, if they could only move enough of it. A ship captain named Lorenzo Dow Baker bought a load of bananas in Jamaica and sold it in Boston at a staggering profit. Others followed, and demand exploded. One variety came to rule them all. It was called the Gros Michel, big, sweet, with a thick peel that survived rough travel. For decades, it was the banana the world knew. And within a single generation, the banana went from a rare treat to the cheapest fruit in America. Cheaper than apples grown a few miles away. Demand was growing faster than anyone could supply it. The old way, buying from scattered small farmers, could not keep up. Someone was going to build an empire to feed it. That empire was the United Fruit Company. Formed in 1899, it grew into one of the most powerful corporations the world had ever seen. One of its founders, Miner Keith, had been building railroads in Costa Rica. The work was so brutal that thousands of laborers died laying the tracks through jungle and swamp. People said later that there was a dead man buried under every railroad tie. 3 of Keith's own brothers died in the effort. To make the ruinously expensive railroad pay for itself, Keith planted bananas along the tracks. The trains that were meant to carry coffee ended up carrying fruit, and the fruit made him one of the richest men in the region. United Fruit went on to control enormous stretches of land across Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Panama. It owned the plantations, the railroads, the ports, the telegraph lines, and entire company towns. Workers were often paid in company money that could only be spent in company stores. Across Central America, people gave the company a single nickname: El Pulpo, the octopus, because its arms reached into everything. It decided who governed, bribing officials, and helping install leaders who would protect its profits. A writer of the era coined a phrase for these nations whose land, economy, and politics were owned by a foreign fruit company. He called them banana republics. If you are enjoying this hidden history, take a moment to subscribe. Every week we uncover the extraordinary stories behind ordinary food, and the most shocking part of this one is still ahead, because controlling the land and the railroads was not enough. When the workers of Colombia went on strike in 1928, asking for basic rights, the response was the massacre we began with. Soldiers, sent to protect the flow of fruit, fired on their own people in a town square. And the events in Colombia were only a preview of what the banana business was willing to do. The story now moves to Guatemala and to the most stunning chapter of all. In the early 1950s, Guatemala elected a reformer named Jacobo Arbenz. Most of the country's good farmland was owned by a tiny elite and by United Fruit, and much of it sat unused. Arbenz passed a land reform law. The government would buy up large stretches of uncultivated land and give it to landless peasants. United Fruit would be paid for its idle land, but only at the low value the company itself had been claiming on its taxes for years. The company was furious. So United Fruit fought back with a weapon almost no one saw coming. It hired Edward Bernays, the man often called the father of public relations and a nephew of Sigmund Freud. Bernays had already spent years teaching Americans to see the banana as a wholesome part of breakfast. Now he ran a brilliant and ruthless campaign to convince the American press and public that Guatemala was turning communist. He arranged for journalists to take guided tours, planted stories, and helped manufacture the sense that a Soviet beachhead was forming in America's backyard. This was the height of the Cold War, and the fear was easy to sell. The company also had friends in the very highest places. The Secretary of State and the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency were brothers, and both had professional ties to the world of United Fruit. When the company spoke, Washington listened. In 1954, the Central Intelligence Agency launched a covert operation to overthrow Arbenz. A small armed force, backed by American planes and a flood of propaganda broadcasts, was enough to break his nerve. Arbenz resigned, and a military officer took his place. What followed was not democracy. It was decades of dictatorship and civil war, in which hundreds of thousands of Guatemalans were killed or disappeared. A democratically elected government had been toppled, in large part, to protect the profits of a fruit company. This decision seemed like business. It was not. It shaped the fate of an entire nation for generations. But while empires rose and fell over the banana, the fruit itself was quietly being reinvented. Getting a fragile banana from a tropical plantation to a kitchen in Chicago was a feat of engineering. United Fruit built a fleet of refrigerated and ventilated steamships, painted white to reflect the heat, known as the Great White Fleet. Railroads carried the fruit to the coast, telegraph lines coordinated every step, and the bananas were shipped while still green. On arrival, they were ripened in special rooms using ethylene gas, then sent to market at the perfect moment. The company controlled the entire chain, from the soil to the store shelf. But there was a hidden weakness in all of it. Every Gros Michel banana was a clone, genetically identical to every other. And in the early 20th century, a soil fungus began creeping through the plantations. It was called Panama disease. It choked the plants from the roots and left whole fields dead. Because every plant was identical, none of them could resist it. The fungus spread from farm to farm, country to country, unstoppable. By the 1950s and 60s, the mighty Gros Michel was finished as an export crop. The industry was facing collapse. It survived by switching to a different variety, one that happened to resist that strain of the fungus. It was called the Cavendish. It was blander and more delicate, but it could be shipped and it could be saved. Companies tore up their plantations and replanted the entire world's banana supply.
The banana most of us have eaten our whole lives is not the one our great-grandparents knew. The fruit was swapped out beneath our feet, and almost no one noticed. By then, the banana had become woven into everyday life. It turned up in breakfast cereal, in lunch boxes, in banana bread, and in the towering banana split invented in an American drugstore in the early 1900s. By the early 20th century, the United States was importing tens of millions of bunches a year. Companies taught people how to use it. Chiquita created a cartoon mascot, a singing banana, with a jingle that told Americans exactly how to ripen and serve the fruit. When a shortage hit in the 1920s, a hit song swept the country called "Yes, We Have No Bananas." Marketing made the banana feel wholesome, cheerful, and somehow all-American, even though it grew thousands of miles away, under conditions almost no shopper ever imagined. It was cheap, convenient, and wrapped by nature in its own peel, the perfect modern snack. But that cheapness was hiding a cost the industry did not want people to see. Today, around 99% of the bananas sold for export are Cavendish, which means the world has done the exact same thing all over again. It has bet everything on a single clone, a single genetic line planted across the entire planet. And history is repeating. A new strain of the old fungus, known as Tropical Race 4, is spreading across Asia, Africa, and Australia, and it has already reached Latin America. There is no cure, and once it is in the soil, it can stay there for decades. It could do to the Cavendish exactly what Panama disease did to the Gros Michel, and scientists have been warning about it for years. The human cost has not disappeared either. From the 1960s onward, plantation workers across Central America were exposed to a pesticide known as DBCP long after it was suspected of causing harm. It left tens of thousands of them sterile, and the lawsuits over it still drag through the courts today. Wages on many banana plantations remain very low, and workers who try to organize still face intimidation. And in 2007, the company once known as United Fruit, now called Chiquita, admitted in a United States court that it had paid more than $1 million to a violent paramilitary group that had been designated a terrorist organization. The names on the boxes have changed. The basic bargain has not. Cheap fruit for the wealthy world, and the risk and the hardship carried by the people who grow it. Bananas are sold so cheaply that many supermarkets use them just to lure shoppers in, which pushes the pressure right back down the chain to the farmers. So consider the banana sitting in your kitchen right now. It is the most popular fruit in Métis.